Hey guys, I'm back with another live stream here, just a spur of the moment thing. Sometimes I honestly do live streams when my previous video in the day underperforms because some people then don't see it because YouTube doesn't advertise it very widely. And then people are like, you haven't made anything for 2 days. It's like, I've actually put out like 3 videos, but sure, YouTube just doesn't show you when I actually post stuff sometimes. And so I just have to rely on, sometimes going live to show that yes, I'm still alive, I'm still breathing, I'm still making content, and all the other good stuff. Uh, but anyways, actually, that's probably a good way. This is probably a good way of me just quickly plugging at the start of this live stream that you should all go and join my Telegram channel. Link in the comments right there in the live stream comments if you want to go and join, sign up, just so you see all the videos as we post them in order. It helps out so that when I post a video, then you see it as soon as it pops up and you don't rely it coming up in your recommendations. I'm like 87 years old. When I get onto YouTube, I hit subscriptions and I scroll through the subscriptions trying to see if anything is newly posted from people I watch. Apparently, nobody does that because I even look at my YouTube statistics of how many people click on my videos through the subscription feed, and it's like 0.5%. So I'm in the 0.5% upper class of people who actually goes through subscriptions and checks out stuff like that. But without further ado, now that we actually have a few people watching, I want to introduce the topic tonight, which you can all read in the title because you have eyes, which is talking about the Toronto St. Paul by-election that's coming up on Monday and whatever is going to happen in terms of the outcome. Who will it hurt? Will it hurt Justin Trudeau? Will it hurt Pierre Poilievre if either of their parties lose? Is it going to be pretty much just washed off as a momentary issue that doesn't really affect anything? Uh, All Mott Gaming says, I do have a question. Why do they say it's a riding as a stronghold? It's a stronghold because the last time the Conservatives won the riding was 1988. Brian Mulroney won it. He wasn't the candidate there, but Brian Mulroney's PC party won it. Since then, it was just, I think it was just, what was her name? Catherine. Oh my goodness, I have to go look up her name. I know who it is. It's on the tip of my tongue, and I don't want to say it and embarrass myself. But she had owned the riding since 1993. It was Carolyn Bennett. Oh no, it was okay. Barry Campbell was the Liberal who had the riding from 93 to 97. Then Carolyn Bennett had it from 1997 all the way till 2024 when she resigned, and now they have Leslie Church running as their replacement candidate. I actually had a couple people call me about this race today. One was more from the minority community of politics, saying that a lot of people from specific minority communities in the riding are not going to show up for the Liberals, even though they are default Liberal voters, simply to put pressure on Justin Trudeau to get out of office, and also just to try and make the Liberals smarten up. It's a bad bet because that's assuming that they actually like to make changes when they make mistakes. The Liberals don't like to even admit that they make mistakes, so I don't think this will really hold them to account from that end. It will maybe hold them to account by potentially electing a conservative and making and being able to hold them to account by taking away their power from these stronghold ridings. Hi, Clayton from Canada's left coast. Everyone always calls me Clayton because I say my name too fast, Wyatt Claypool, and in people's minds it blends together and becomes Clayton. I'm not even kidding. When I was door knocking, like at the end of most conversations, so someone would be like, "Well, this was a great chat, Clayton," and then that would be it. uh, Yeah, the record 80 plus candidate. Yeah, that's why Carolyn Bennett pretty much resigned, is that she is just legitimately too old for the job now. She's 73 years old, which, yeah, I guess in American politics, you can go all the way until you're in your 90s. But in Canadian politics, early 70s is kind of the time where you want to retire and do something else. I believe Carolyn Bennett, though, is becoming the ambassador for Canada to Denmark, which I assume is a pretty cushy job. Not really many flashpoints between Canada and Denmark these days. It's a retirement plan. I guess she wants to go eat like reindeer sausage and do whatever the Danish like, eat Danishes, even though they're technically like Austrian or whatever. But that's what they're doing. But yeah, so now they have Leslie Church out there. The problem, and I'm going to talk about the problem And I can talk a little bit more about problems having been kicked out of conservative nomination. So you don't have to be artificially not positive. I've never been an artificially positive person. If there was ever problems with conservative marketing plan, even as I was a candidate, I'd still say, I wish they would do this. I wish they would do that. But I can say the conservative candidate in Toronto St. Paul is concerning because if he loses, it has deep implications for the sort of people who kicked me out of my riding. Because the guy who the Conservative Party is running in Toronto St. Paul, Don Stewart, is effectively just a lobbyist that they ran as the candidate. And that, if he loses, it kind of puts into a question a lot of these ridings where people have been artificially kicked out of the races and disqualified. That, okay, you kicked people like myself and you effectively cut the brakes out from Sabrina Maddow, Garrett Van Doren, all of these other people in these ridings. There was actually a third guy in my riding who got kicked out. And then the candidates that they're installing in some of these ridings, like Toronto St. Paul, are kind of duds. Maybe he's not a dud. Again, Monday will determine whether or not he is or not. It's a winnable riding. I hope the party doesn't, if the Conservatives lose, I hope that they don't just rest on the fact that, well, it's still a Liberal stronghold. We can't be expected to win. These days, I think if you work hard enough, you can win. If you have a good enough candidate, you can win. And so I'm trying to, I'm hoping that there's a few more people who are more inspiring, because if you run somebody who just their resume is that they used to be a director at Jenny Byrne and Associates, who is the top advisor to Polyev right now, bit of a concern if then they end up scuffing a riding that could have been won. But I think obviously the bigger implications are if Mr. Trudeau's candidate Leslie Church loses, and it's been so ironic looking at this riding. You have homeless addicts sleeping outside the Liberal Party HQ out there. That you have just all the needles on the ground around her campaign headquarters. There's literal visual representations of what Liberal rule for 8 years looks like all around the riding. It's still a tough fight, obviously, but if the Conservatives win, that's when you wonder if Trudeau was then forced to step down. That if you lose Carolyn Bennett's riding, if you lose effectively a downtown Toronto riding, that becomes a little bit scary. I'm going to bring it up on screen just so people realize how downtown this is. There's some suburban parts of the riding where it's a little bit more some townhouses and whatnot, but for the most part, this is apartment buildings, skyscrapers, and the rest. The only riding I could say would be even more pathetic to lose would be Chrystia Freeland's riding, Toronto Rosedale University or whatever. That would be a pathetic one. But this is where the riding is, just above Rosedale University. And Spadina Fort York, where one of the very good MPs actually currently in Parliament, Kevin Vaughn, is residing. I hope Kevin ends up running for office somewhere for the Conservatives. He's a really good guy. I think he's fantastic on the foreign interference issue. But I'll jump down to some questions. Do you believe Toronto St. Paul could flip to blue, or is it still considered a safe red seat? In theory, it's a safe red seat. I'll pull up the polling right now for Toronto St. Paul. It's effectively a toss up. But it is winnable. But if you won this one, it does prove that the Conservative formula right now is working well for typical default Liberals, because figuring out how a default Liberal voter can flip blue unlocks a lot of ridings around the GTA. Obviously, a default Liberal voter in Toronto is different than a default Liberal voter in somewhere like Brampton or Mississauga. But there's enough translation there that I think if this game plan works in Toronto St. Paul, frankly, if this game plan works with as weak of a candidate as the Conservatives seem to be running, then you know that you can pretty much win any riding with the same formula. But I have it here on screen. It is leaning Liberal, but this is a riding that shouldn't even be in consideration whether it's leaning or not. So we have LPC leaning. They're projecting it being a 40% victory for Liberals to a 35% showing for the Conservatives. That's just the average. Obviously, there's the ranges here. So the Conservatives could possibly fall into any part of this blue range, just as Liberals could fall into anywhere in this red range. So if the Conservatives finish up around this part of their probability, and the Liberals fall in towards the bottom, then the Conservatives can win. But there is always the idea of, is the NDP going to put up a big fight, or are they going to let the Liberals take some of their votes to keep the Liberals in power? And what are the Greens going to end up doing? All the Green voters can be somehow even more sanctimonious than even a NDP voter, and so they tend to be very hard to wrangle into voting Liberal just to stop a Conservative. And then I didn't talk about while it was on screen, but right now 338 based on all the polling aggregates from around Ontario as well as the historical riding finishes. They're giving the Conservatives a 19% shot of taking it. I'm trying to find some stuff. I don't want to move on too fast when people are asking questions. Greetings from the deep behind the Liberal lines on the eastern tip of Canada. Well, you have to let me know what the eastern tip of Canada is and behind Liberal lines, because if we look up the riding, it might end up being a new sort of blue stronghold. Did you see the BC Conservatives picking up a United candidate to run for the Conservatives instead? Yeah, like that doesn't sound as big of a deal as it would if you know the backstory for some people. Obviously, some of you in British Columbia will know. I haven't made a video on this. It's a little bit too small of a story to do a video on. I'll maybe mention it in a future video on British Columbia, but I forget the candidate's name. Frankly, it doesn't matter. But there was a candidate that BC United had been like really gunning to recruit. They worked hard getting this guy to sign on as a BC United candidate, and he just flipped BC Conservatives. So not only are the BC Conservatives stealing BC United MLAs, but they're stealing candidates, their star candidates, even though in a certain sense it's actually harder to flip candidates than MLAs, because when you're a candidate you almost feel powerless and, well, these people let me run for them, so I'm going to stick with them. So to have a candidate seem like this is a waste of my time and walk away is quite telling. The recent poll that came out for British Columbia showed like NDP at 47% and like BC Conservatives at like, or it was like NDP at like 37 and BC United or Conservatives at like 23. I don't quite believe that statistic, because it was still polling like United at like 11 or 12%, which doesn't seem realistic based off of the news we've had over the past month. That's where you should never unskew a poll. Generally, polls are pretty accurate. As many people like to say, oh, polls are all rigged. They're not. These polling firms do polling for free to show how accurate their market research methods are. But this poll, it's kind of like a poll that just came out in the UK that was showing like the Reform Party was going to win 0 seats, even though they're surging. And it's because they did the polling from back in late May before Nigel Farage had taken over the Reform Party as leader, and a lot of stuff had changed. And so I could see this new poll that came out, because provincial pollings can be a little bit tougher. You get less people who do provincial polling, so sometimes they're collecting the polling data over like an entire month. And so this poll that just came out in British Columbia could be before all the BC United, BC Conservative fighting had stopped or started. And so these days, I don't see the BC Conservatives as being a sub 30% party. And I don't see the NDP as being a party that's punching anywhere close to 40%. Not anywhere close, but I could see the NDP doing 35%. But they don't exactly have an excited base of voters. Like, who's running out the door to keep needles on the streets, which is effectively what you're doing if you're voting NDP out in British Columbia. But it's so important that the BC Conservatives win, because as an Albertan, I'm not trying to blame all you people out in BC, but you guys tend to generate some of the craziest policies in your province. I know it's not your fault. It's the politicians who say, I'm going to solve X problem, and they propose something that sounds okay, and then a bunch of middle class people vote for them because that sounds very reasonable and middle class, and then they end up like, well, we said we were going to fix the drug issue, and then that means that they just start giving out free drugs. So that's a big, so by getting rid of the NDP, we can stop BC from being quite literally the meth lab of bad policy in Canada. Frankly, Burnell, what's your plan? Continue in politics or focus on TNT or both? Is there a chance you can be undisqualified? If so, what's your chances? I already sent in my appeal, and they still kicked me out. They didn't even have a motion put forward to vote on my appeal for the nomination in Signal Hill. They basically had zero reason to keep me out. And when I say basically zero reason, I mean zero reason. I just have an addiction to always putting qualifiers before I say something. There's no reason to kick me out. I heard that they made a 9-page dossier on me, which is full of nonsense. It's literally full of nothing. They just were trying to make a document and saying, oh, wow, it's 9 pages, and Wyatt must have done something wrong. I've had people basically leak me this information and read me what was in this dossier. It was too much of a risk to send it to me directly so I could have it. But the dossier was full of stuff like Wyatt Claypool follows pro-life organizations on social media, or Wyatt Claypool criticized Andrew Scheer and the Conservative Party's campaign in 2019, which you should have criticisms of Andrew Scheer's campaign in 2019. They lost. So obviously they did things wrong. I'm even nice to Andrew Scheer. I think he was a good leader, or he could have been a good leader, but they had too many advisors around him throwing him off his game. They were running on the wrong things. They were focus grouping everything. These are widely known things that people criticized, but that was deemed to be a problem. I had a tweet. I'll bring it up on my phone. It was ridiculous because when the person mentioned that they had taken issue with something I said, I immediately recognized the tweet I made that they were trying to talk about. It's this one on my phone right here, which I will read out to you. This was considered anti-Polyev, which is funny because I'm very friendly with people in the Polyev family. I don't think they would like me if they knew I was like famously anti-Polyev. Um, and it says, all no doubt, and this is right after Polyev won the 22 Conservative Party leadership, because obviously I was elated because I hated Aaron O'Toole. He was an awful leader, and he still has some of his donors suing me. And so I said, I'll no doubt end up having some criticisms of pure Polyev going forward. And then I say in brackets, as any conservative journalist should, because obviously my job as a journalist is to hold people to account. So if Polyev suddenly says, actually, we're not going to scrap the gun ban, I'd make a video or write an article saying, hey, this is not the right move forward. We need to actually be taking principled stances on this. That's what I'm meaning. But then I move on to say, but for tonight, I'll be happy that the CPC leader is someone who actually has conservative principles. How is this anti-Polyev? I don't, whatever. And again, they don't actually think I'm anti-Polyev or I'm radical or anything like that. They just didn't want me. And so they wanted another guy who had a good relationship with an insider lobbyist who's advising the party. This is where, and people are like, you should join the PPC. The PPC also kicks out people from their nominations. They actually appoint a lot of their candidates, not because they don't have time for nominations. It's because sometimes they've had nominations in the PPC. Max has stepped in and said, no, that guy. And then they shut down the nomination. So no, it's not any better. But this is just the problem with the party system in general. Polyev didn't do this to me. He had nothing to do with this. I doubt he actually follows the nominations. He's busy. In a certain sense, that might be the problem, that when he's busy doing rallies and policy work and all these other fundraisers, there's people in the back end effectively stealing his good name to then go and make decisions in these nominations to kick people out or to try and undermine people in order to put someone else in place who's like some lobbyist consultant who's now the candidate, even though this person doesn't actually have very conservative principles. Like, I guess they'll have to follow the leader, and Polyev's a good conservative, so you hope these people don't rebel someday and say, actually, we're not going to do anything you want because we're all a bunch of hacky lobbyist type people. But yeah. Any of these parties gunning for this riding, could any of if them win? Centrist, PPC, Conservative, NDP, Green. Are you talking about the Toronto St. Paul? Toronto St. Paul is just liberal and conservative. All the other parties don't matter. Like, the NDP is a big competitor in a lot of the Toronto ridings, but Toronto St. Paul, especially with a larger Jewish population, tends to be more default liberal. And those days, many Jewish voters are now going conservative because the liberals, even more so than the NDP, are like the party of blatant anti-Semitism. Yeah. Sorry, I'm really falling behind on some of these comments. People from ridings all around Toronto, St. Paul canvassing there to help the Conservative win. Some are only hoping they exceed 20% of the vote, a step forward, but not a win. I want to win. And I think that at the very least, even if the Conservative Party just gets close, obviously they should claim victory anyways, because, hey, they could say, hey, Carolyn Bennett, and maybe I'll just quickly look up what the last riding was. So in 21, the Liberals got 49% of the vote, 49.5, and in 2019 they got 55.1. The Conservatives in 2021 got 26.5. If the Conservatives can get anywhere over 32, they should at least say, hey, look, we did much better. Still, I think it's a very winnable riding because it wasn't like I just say it's winnable. So I think the Conservatives just have to focus on making it a win. Hey, Wyatt, what's poppin'? Not much. Go Oilers from Prairie Strong. Yeah, I heard the Oilers were doing well. That's why I started the live stream, because I know that people don't have to watch as intently when they're so far ahead. Bernadette Paul, I can't imagine why anyone would vote for far left parties. Toronto isn't part of Canada or even this planet. The funny thing is when you walk around Toronto, because obviously every once in a while I go out there to visit Daniel and work on some stuff. If we have like we went to down to like the Bitcoin convention in Miami at one point. I'm not even a big Bitcoin guy. We just got invited down, and then I was just there in Toronto for some stuff about the Iranian community and protesting at Chrystia Freeland's office. And what happened there was like, well, what I always notice when I walk around is so many people who just don't like, they look like they're still in college. They obviously aren't students, but you frankly see the pink hair everywhere. Girls who look are trying to look as like androgynous as possible, hipsters everywhere, people who just have never worked a manual labor job in their lives or even a hard retail job. And like you wonder why these people vote this way. It's like they all work fake jobs. Like not everyone, obviously, it's still the minority of Toronto, but it makes up much of the NDP Liberal voting base is people who work fake government jobs, fake bureaucratic HR jobs. Uh, Oilers win from David F. I don't watch hockey. I really don't watch hockey either. I just saw that the score was good for the Oilers. And this is your spoiler alert. If you're trying to watch the game later, it's not my fault if you now hear the score from me in the next 5 seconds. So you have a few seconds to mute. Okay, so like apparently the score is 3-1 Oilers from the Panthers. When the Oilers, again, I don't watch hockey, but when they were down 3 games to nothing, and then they won that first game in their streak now 8-2, I was like, that basically wins them the next game for free because it must put the Panthers on such on their back heels to the point where it's probably kind of it's a staggering defeat. And yeah, do you think MP Kevin Vaughn would be the Tory candidate for Willowdale? I've heard that Kevin is interested in Willowdale. I've tried to get conservative MPs and different people inside the party interested in him in Willowdale. Nobody's trying to jam, and sometimes people react this way. Oh, well, he should have to run in a nomination. Yes, Kevin, I've talked to Kevin. Kevin is not under the impression that he should ever be given a riding. He wants to run in a nomination, but obviously when you run in a nomination, you have to contact a regional organizer. You have to contact someone from the party who will give you the package to be able to fill out your paperwork and sell memberships. So it's one of those things where he's basically just waiting to be given the ability to even apply to run. Sausage slaps. Funny, the paid media now proclaiming this by-election is pivotal, considering it's an assumed safe riding. How about the other ones that the Liberals lost? As much as I wanted Turdum gone, it is pivotal because like Durham, it was Jamil Javani just winning back Aaron O'Toole's old seat. Portage Lisgar, when you had like Winnipeg South, when you had some of these other ridings, Heritage, especially Calgary Heritage. These ridings are not up in the air. Nobody's shocked at who's winning these ridings. It's pretty much which was just default. This would represent the first flip from a red seat to a blue seat in this cycle. That's why it's so pivotal. Because if Trudeau can't hold on to Toronto, you get a lot of Liberal MPs who usually are completely mindless Trudeau followers, and they start to wonder, well, how am I going to keep my job with this guy leading the party? And you might have them do a bit of a palace coup to get rid of Trudeau to then install like a Mark Carney or someone else. Even then, I don't think they would even want Mark Carney because then we have the awkward 3-4 month period where Trudeau's not the leader and maybe someone else is the prime minister and Mark Carney's having to have another Liberal step down so he can run for a riding. And which Liberal do you have step down who couldn't potentially lose? Mark Carney couldn't lose their seat in the by-election because Mark Carney is not exactly a big name draw. People know who he is. But the problem is the people who know who he is are like politically obsessed individuals. And the average person who is watching the Oilers-Panthers game right now doesn't care who Mark Carney is. And they probably when they see him, they'll just say like, oh, he's some old stodgy banker. I hope Trudeau doesn't cheat in this by-election. I worry that possibly sometime at the 11th hour of the by-election, Trudeau will sway the election in his favor, praying for free and fair elections. Well, thanks for the comment, Floody Bay. There's really no way of cheating in a Canadian election. We use paper ballots. Like, again, the Liberals wouldn't be sending every single cabinet minister and their mother to the riding to campaign with Leslie Church. If this was a riding where they assume that they're going to win because they're going to cheat, you can't really. Cheating in politics is extremely difficult because people smell it out really easily, and also if you assume that you're better at cheating than the other side, because every political party has people who are experienced in rigging nominations in them, they know how a bad election looks, and they could call it out pretty easily. Did you remember Patrick Brown as the PC party leader? Like, the thing is that, like, Doug Ford is basically the same way. Do you think there'd ever be rigging in an Ontario election? Every party rigs their nominations in Ontario, and so provincially, like, every party would be able to catch each other because they all know what the tricks are. Has anyone gone to tie vote in any of the ridings in Canadian history, such like this one? I think there have been ridings that have gone. Let's see this. Okay, that's hilarious. Uh, there was actually a tie in a PEI provincial election where they had a coin flip to see who's going to win. That's hilarious. Okay, I forget which riding is this. Um, Vernon River Stratford had a tie election in 2015, so that's neat. So that demonstrates you always go out and vote. It doesn't matter what party is advantaged, you always go out and vote because you never know. Would Thank you for the comment, Floody Bay. Who would have thought that Trudeau from the 2015 campaign would turn into the most hated PM ever in possible 2024-2025 re-election campaign? I don't think it was that hard to imagine he'd be the most hated. Um, I think it's more so like whenever I see Trudeau these days, the thing that I find remarkable is how old he seems, in the sense that he just kind of seems tired. He's rusty. He doesn't seem like the same man he was in 2015. In 2015, I didn't like him obviously, but he seemed like positive and charismatic, and now he's like weaselly. I guess I would just say like he's very much he's like kind of it's not a sleazeball. I'm just trying to like find a word where it's really difficult. Yeah. Uh, Tyler Torsch, if you had run, would you ever be allowed to keep the channel? Safe or Northern Perspective only worked in government and got channel canned from the channel for the channel. That's weird. Well, yeah. To be fair, when you work in government, you probably can't. Like when you work as a staffer in government, you probably can't have a channel that's like frontward facing, because people could, if it's a important enough position, say that you're obviously not unbiased enough to work in that position. If I was in government, I'd just keep doing. And this is actually me kind of comment. I forgot to uh, answer this earlier. If I was an MP or I was the candidate for the Conservatives, I would just say I'm just going to keep doing my show, because why wouldn't I? In the sense that it's so silly whenever, and this isn't, I haven't heard this from the party because it's not like they've told Aaron Gunn to stop doing journalism or making documentaries. If anything, they probably encouraged him to do it. That you end up sucking all the value out of your candidates when you tell them to basically to conform to a specific style of speaking and like networking and all this stuff and communicating. That more people need to be able to try more things, and you get sometimes hesitancy in large parties where they're like, well, if you do something and it embarrasses the party in any way or anyone finds it slightly edgy, well, someone might complain to us. If you make it clear early on enough to the public that our candidates do what they want because they ran in a fair nomination, our members voted for them, then nobody can really complain about you winning about you saying and doing whatever you want, because, well, why wouldn't you be able to say and do whatever you want? You won the race fair and square. So that's like it's like the pro-life stuff. The party could save itself by just saying, yeah, we have pro-life members of our caucus, and you ask them questions if you need to ask them questions. Don't come to me. I'm just I'm the leader, but I'm not the candidate for that riding. They would diffuse so many problems, because it's not the leader's job to tell people what exactly their positions on different issues can be. Because if you just say they can make their own, they can take their own stances as long as their stance isn't like obviously inappropriate, it's not obviously like radical, then just leave them alone, because now the media can't beat the leadership of the party with that stick of saying, "Ooh, are you going to kick this person their local area, or their board vote them out, or like they nominate somebody else." Because once a party just has an open nomination system, like, you basically can't be criticized for having that person in the party. It's like, no, the members voted for them. People don't like them. They'll either not vote for them in the general, or they'll vote someone else in the next nomination. Yeah. Sorry, you're gonna run as an independent when you run? No, no, no. I was running in the Conservative Party nomination for Calgary Signal Hill, and then got unfairly disqualified for no stated reason. And what's crazy, I should talk about in a second, all the gaslighting that's happened after I was kicked out. But am I going to run as an independent? There's no point in running as an independent. There's no utility to doing it. You'd need $200,000 and crazy high name recognition to make an independent run actually work. Like Jody Wilson-Raybould can do it, but that's a special circumstance. Floody Bay, wouldn't be surprised if the Conservatives just narrowly won Toronto St. Paul. We're no matter. Ooh. Sorry, it appears like my network was cutting out there. It's crazy how bad my internet can be sometimes. Let me know if I'm breaking up here. Brian Lilly says if Liberals win Toronto St. Paul, Justin Trudeau might stick around under the federal elections. Better result for Pierre Poilievre. Whereas if if Tories win the by-election, Liberals might replace Trudeau. Your take? I honestly don't think it matters who they replace him with, because even though people will claim Mark Carney is more marketable, the problem is when he's not the elected prime minister of the country, he's just the appointed prime minister of the country. It's a bad look, and it looks weak. And when voters detect weakness from a party, they're not going to vote for them. This is really where the Rishi Sunak's Conservatives in the UK are falling apart, and Reform's rocketing up the middle now and actually becoming competitive with the Labour Party. And it's because the Reform Party gives the voters confidence. They take strong stances. They're a tough party. And with all of the leadership's changes they've had in the UK Conservatives, it just feels like a weak, listless party at this point. City of Calgary had voting machines. Yes, they did. At the same time, people need to not read too much into that. Like, again, I was a scrutineer for somebody. I saw the voting machines. They still needed all the ballots to be right there to be counted if anything happened. It was purely okay. Everything basically happened as we expected it to, based on how strong we knew our candidate was in different precincts. And we didn't win. It wasn't because of machines. How Patrick Brown got so far failing up blows my mind. Well, and that was one of my competitors that the party wanted to stick in instead of me in this riding. He's a man who doesn't even live in the area, Jeremy Nixon, and he lives 30 minutes outside the riding, and that's me being generous. I basically just put a point on my house and a point on the very corner of the riding that he lives in. And I'm assuming he lives I'm assuming he lives on the most western edge of his riding, and then my house, which is basically kind of like in the mid center of the riding. It's pretty easy to get to. Like, it's not like way on the other side of the west. It's more towards the east of the riding, and that would be a 30-minute drive at 1 p.m. when traffic was low. So he doesn't live around here, and he's running 5 elections in Calgary in the same general area, 1 municipal race and 4 provincial races, and he's only won one of them. And so that's the type of person that people in the party want to jam through, which is annoying. I'm at least still backing a guy for the nomination, Michael Kim, trying to make sure Michael Kim wins so that we don't end up having some lobbyist hack end up becoming our representative in a riding he doesn't even care about. What's the PPC candidate for this riding? What's the pros and cons? The pros are nothing, and the cons are he can't win and he doesn't know what he's doing. I don't know who the PPC candidate is. If I even have to look up his name, that probably shows that he's not relevant in this race. Jason Abbey. Someone asked Wyatt how he would implement measures against homeless people. I don't know what you mean about this. Homeless are people to him. Yeah, my audio cut off a bit earlier. I had a bad internet for a second there. It just kind of like randomly sweeps in and out. I was shocked when you reported you were disqualified. I would have voted for you, and I think the Conservatives missed out in developing a future PM. Well, I mean, like I'm to a certain extent I'm the type of guy who wouldn't really want to be maybe prime minister one day, but I'd be just okay with just being able to get things done. I just like being in the trenches closely enough that I can actually do something. Because people told me you could be a policy advisor. The problem is that a policy advisor you can't model the behavior you want. You just have to find someone who will maybe model the behavior, but even then, at the end of the day, everyone's their own independent person. So it's like I want to run in more races and do things on the ground because people are like, be an advisor. I'd like to be an advisor who's also an MP so I can show people how to do something, or an MLA or anything. So I can show people how you should do something, model the behavior, and make people follow you. It's like Rob Ford as an advisor would be far less effective than being the mayor. And Rob Ford, like you could have said like, oh well, he's too harsh. He has, he's too edgy. He can't be elected in Toronto. Well, he was, and it was better than sort of just jamming through a crap. It was better than jamming through a crap red Tory as the Toronto mayor and hoping that Rob Ford as a councillor can kind of nudge the mayor into the right position. Sometimes you have to get the elected position to make sure the job gets done properly, and that's effectively what I was doing. It's kind of a roll up your sleeves, and if you can't rely on anyone else to do something but yourself. Angela Williams. Jeremy, is that Jason Nixon's brother? Yes, both of them are very experienced nomination cheaters. If you guys know about the 2023 nomination that Jason Nixon basically had rigged for him, where they kicked out Tim Hoven, who was easily going to be a clobber Jason in the open nomination. And they kicked out Tim Hoven, I heard, because he had a Gab account. A Gab account he had never posted on before. I saw your video. Thank you. Is it Eden B. Jacobs? I saw your video on Polyev's comments re lower immigration in French. Do you think Polyev would repeat in English, move on and not mention it? Double down. What strategy would you benefit the CPC more? Well, I'd wait for the English media to ask him the same question. Then he can repeat his answer and say, and then when they try and put pressure on him, oh, isn't that xenophobic? Isn't that whatever? And he can say, well, why are 62% of foreign-born Canadians also in favor of reducing immigration? Do you think 1.2 million people can fit in 230,000 houses? That's the stance I would take, and you have to have another good media moment, because every time he kind of dunks on a journalist, it ends up creating a lot of focus on the discussion that was taking place. And so every time they've accused him of being far right, it actually makes it so that nobody thinks he's far right, because it was such an embarrassing moment for the journalist asking the question. And so if he can get a journalist to pressure him on that, and then he can swing back by saying, yeah, of course I want to lower immigration, and then make fun of the journalist for thinking it's xenophobic to think that 1.2 million people can't fit in 200,000 houses, that would be a great moment for Polyev, and I think would get a lot of people. I think it would actually convince a lot of people on the immigration issue who are still on the fence, too nervous to come out and just say, yeah, immigration's too high. Like, I found there's so many people when I was door knocking who would even describe themselves as pure centrists. They don't like too right-wing politics. They wanted immigration lowered. It was crazy. Bronson Wally, what was their excuse for kicking you out of the nomination? Well, they gave me no official reason. The reason behind the scenes was, oh, I didn't submit enough information, or I didn't give them enough, like I hid information on myself, which is ludicrous. I didn't. It's a stupid excuse, because obviously I can't tell you 100% of things about myself. Nobody can, because there is always more to be said about a person. They couldn't even find anything that was wrong that I didn't tell them. Like, again, they're saying, you never said to us that you follow pro-life groups on social media, because that's what they're implying when in that 9-page dossier. They have points like Wyatt follows pro-life groups on social media, and Wyatt criticized the way the party ran the 2019 campaign, and Wyatt described himself a neoconservative in an interview, which that was the weirdest part, that was a problem they had with me. And so, like, yeah, they didn't really have an excuse. They just merely needed the smoke screen that there was 9 pages of things on me so that they could get rid of me when every point in the 9 pages is a non-point. Like, I was being told that national counselors, when they were presenting this stuff, because they email them the information before the meeting starts, and they're confused. They're like, "How is any of this bad?" And they were just like all shoulders, refusing to answer. Even the people on the National Candidate Selection Committee, who I heard voted in line with what certain insiders wanted and to get in getting rid of myself and Leela A here, they didn't even know why they were told to vote against me, yet they did it because people tend to do a bit of the follow the leader stuff. Um, and then, uh, thank you, infectious prototype. I love your post. You're particular. Well, I try to be particularly particular. Wyatt, you're too much of an independent thinker. That's dangerous for those who want sycophants. Well, and that's the problem, is that the funny thing is that what you'll have some people try and justify to me is that, well, you can be a little bit too outspoken. These aren't people who are decision makers in the party. Like, these are people who are just trying to intimate to me, well, this is probably why they got rid of you. You're outspoken. Poilievre's outspoken. Why do you think Poilievre's popular? Because he's outspoken, he takes stances on controversial issues and wins people over to his side. Being controversial in politics is actually great, because if you're not controversial, that means you're not talking about anything that people care about. People vote in every election based on the controversial issues at play. Nobody votes on the issues that nobody could possibly disagree on. People vote on the issues that are polarizing. And so you actually need to sometimes take polarizing positions, and you hopefully are taking the position or winning people over to your side, and you're winning more than half of people on that issue to yourself. This is how you actually win elections. You take hard stances, you prove that you have the guts to do it, and you basically show yourself to be a leader. When you have people who are terrified to take a position on everything, well, you're not going to be that shocked when they become the people always pumping the brakes on reforms that need to be made in government, because their entire political career is saying nothing, doing nothing. And now, I hopefully in a conservative government, we're not having to rely on Poilievre and a few people doing everything, because everyone else is terrified to do anything, so they're waiting for Poilievre to tell them what to do. Uh, so to basically say this, I don't even think the independent thinker thing wasn't a problem for most people in the party. Like, I'm friendly with 95% of people in the Conservative Party, but you get a select few who are nervous political consultants who want everything to be exactly their way and everyone to be singing their songbook, because if everyone's not doing what they want, then that's a risk. Or they simply want friends around because having friends that you got their seats means that they owe you one. And that's a big issue too, is that the funny thing with getting rid of myself and Leela is me and Leela are opposite individuals. She's more on the left, I'm more on the right, obviously. And so getting rid of us didn't make sense, because you would need two unique reasons to dispose of our candidacies. And they didn't. That's why they haven't even leaked out a reason as to why. Because in other cases where they got rid of candidates, they would like leak out a reason, even though no reason's supposed to be released, to at least justify in the media why this person was gotten rid of. But in my case, they haven't even bothered to say anything. Maybe they just think I'm a chump and they don't have to even bother doing that. But you never know. Wyatt, thanks for pronouncing my name correctly and answering in detail. Your 2 cents on impact on Trump back in the White House in Canadian politics. I don't even know, because like the Liberals, have you noticed that the Liberals have stopped talking about Donald Trump so much in relation to Pierre Poilievre? I bet what happened was Donald Trump started doing really well in the polls, and the Liberals realized, wow, we'd be idiotic to keep attacking the man who could very well become the next president of the United States, and we have to negotiate it with again. And Trump ate their lunch last time they negotiated. So I think if Trump becomes the president, it oddly enough probably hurts the Liberals a lot, because they can no longer, because all of their attacks on Poilievre as like Trump end up making the Liberals look like moronic foreign affairs managers, where they for some reason kicked their allies' president in the face for no reason. You'll get some liberal people voting like more stridently voting liberal, or some people going conservative back to liberal, because they're like, we need to stop the far right in North America. But it's not going to be a substantial amount of enough of people that it's going to make any difference. Jason Nixon was on JBP's podcast talking about the cure to homelessness. You're gonna have to send me that one. You can send it to my email, Wyatt@WyattClaypool.com. What is the cure to homelessness? Handing out more money? Because I always hear that usually from red Tories and liberals is that we can cure homelessness by simply, making simply just throwing out money and stuff like that. Just more resources, even though it's not a resource problem; it's a crime problem. TM says some voters are shallow and vote for politicians who will legalize pot. In France, they voted in a 28-year-old guy. Was Macron 28 years old? How old is he right now? I know they serve 5 year. So when he was the president, started in 2017. So he's like 39 years old, I guess. So yeah. But yeah, some voters are very weird single issue voters where pot becomes the big thing for them. And single issue voters who vote on silly policies, they're kind of a product of a good economy. It's kind of like the micro version of, strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times, in the sense that Harper was a pretty good prime minister. So the economy was doing really well, especially in relation to the rest of the world. And so people were allowed to vote at that time on frivolous stuff with, like, do you want pot legalized or not? Which, maybe I'm going to rub people the wrong way, but I think legalizing pot was a bad idea for this country. That was an unfinished post, and I attempted to remove it. Sorry, lol. I'm not a huge fan tonight. Okay, well, stop being on mushrooms. But anyways, Darren McCarthy, do you honestly believe that the mainstream media in both the USA and Canada is pretty well allied to the Liberals and Democratic parties? Yeah, no, I think they're pretty well, they're allies of the Democrats and the Liberals. That's why, and I have people disagree with me in my comments whenever I say that Trump's unpopular in Canada. And they expect that when I say that, that's me saying I hate Donald Trump. I don't. He was a much better president, obviously, than Joe Biden. But like people then expect, like, no, I like him and all my friends like him. Like, guys, you gotta realize people don't like him. And so they're like, but Polyev should say that he likes Trump. That would not help. I'm going to tell you that will not help. Most people in this country watch late night shows from the United States, and they watch Lisa LaFlamme rolling her eyes every time Trump says something. And so they just artificially don't like Donald Trump. And the thing is, like, yeah, is there some things that you could easily, obviously, objectively not like Donald Trump for? Is he a bore sometimes? Does he say stupid things? Do I disagree with him on certain policy issues? Sure. But when you actually bring up the report card on a president, he was actually a pretty good president. So, but people in Canada didn't live in the US where they experienced a good economy and all this stuff. So they just look at it and saying, look at all those crazy Americans and that horrible Donald Trump man. So you can't be shocked when 75, 80% of people still don't like Donald Trump. Yeah, boomers have Trump derangement syndrome. And yeah, it's like, again, I know people on the right who don't like Trump for specific reasons, and I can even agree with some of those reasons. But the people who dislike Trump in Canada, it's not for good reasons. Some of them might be for good reasons, but a lot of it's just that they watch media who doesn't like Trump, and they believe that he said that there were good people on both sides of the Charlottesville riots when that's not what he said, and all that kind of stuff. Like, people are still using 2016 talking points against Trump in Canada. What if half the Liberal caucus left for the PPC or Conservative? Well, they're not going to leave for the PPC. No, and they're not going to leave for the Conservative caucus, because the Conservative Party, even though I find it annoying that the nominations are not very open across the country, that the Conservatives will still want to be picking their own people rather than having to wrangle these Liberals in the long run. Frankly, you only accept floor crossers when the person's very famous and they add value to the party, or you're nervous about your own party's candidate's ability to win that seat if you chose your own candidate. So Anthony Housefather, if he decided to go towards the Conservatives, there's a chance they'd take Anthony Housefather, even though he is a leftist. If he's aligned with the Conservatives enough on a few points, they can justify it, and he makes that Montreal seat much more winnable than a Conservative candidate in the same area. I still don't think they should accept him, because that would just be watering down your own brand too much to win a single seat. Do you think 4 years will be enough to fix the mess the Liberals did in immigration, housing, inflation, woke legislation? 100%. You can do a lot in 4 years. I think what they need to do is just the Conservatives need to get really hawkish on cutting spending. There's some areas where there actually needs to be more spending, like military spending is disgustingly low. We need to raise that. But we need more. We need to cut spending. We need to severely reduce immigration. That's two-thirds or lower on immigration. Basically, we need to almost put a moratorium on new temporary foreign workers, like basically make it very low outside of engineers and people who work very technical jobs. No more temporary foreign workers for a few years. And on students, the cap in place now is probably good, and the universities, frankly, need the foreign student money because of our formula for how much you can charge domestic students. That's the funny thing. Canadian students pay like nothing for university compared to American students, and yet we still have like people like living in tents sometimes outside of campuses to like protest tuition increases. Not talking about the Hamas people, but there legitimately have been in the past like protests on campuses because I can't believe they're raising the tuition by 5%. And it's like you're only paying like $3,500 a semester. That's not that much, or $2,500 a semester. That's nothing compared to what American students are paying for. And the what reason you pay so little is your 75% of your bills are basically taxpayer paid already, and then foreign students pay like double what domestic students pay. Look up Jordan Bardella, 28-year-old. Okay, fair enough. We'll do that. I think we should legalize sex work, tax and regulate the industry, crack down on the digital front. I would just crack down on the digital front and not legalize it because I think that you end up taking away a bit of cutting out a piece of yourself by even saying that we should allow it. Because, we had very low prostitution numbers and stuff like that. And it's prostitution. I'm never going to call it the other thing. If you just start, or like, frankly, again, people don't like to hear it. Do you know how you stop crime? You arrest a lot of people who are involved in it. You don't do this rehabilitation crap where somebody's out in less than a year, and as long as they say, I'm going to be a good boy, they get to be out. You just start incarcerating more people. Because if you're going to violate the rights of other people, assault people, rob people, or murder people, the worst thing you can do is let that person know that if you do any of those horrible things, maximum a year in prison, 2 years in prison, you can handle that. Because even though you and I as rational adults would, one, never commit a crime because it's wrong, and then two, we don't want the punishment, these people see a 2-year prison sentence for like stabbing somebody, and they're like, I can do that. Or like even 6 months. Like sometimes you don't even go to prison for this stuff in Canada. And so if we want the crime rate lowered on all fronts, you got to start locking people up who do actually commit crimes. And it's got to be long sentences that make that person never want to go back, and makes their friends say, yeah, I'm not going to do 10 years for like assaulting somebody and almost killing them. Like if you go to prison for 10 years for like attempted murder, 15 years, people are going to stop fooling around and joining gangs. What's your take on Nigel Farage in the UK? I know his peer has officially come out against immigration. I wonder if he's watching Nigel Farage destroy the British Tories. I always actually know. Here's a little bit of a tidbit people won't know. I through a back channel, and this isn't like backroom nonsense, but through a back channel, I had basically gotten Poilievre's opinion on me running in my nomination on a 2/3 immigration reduction, and I heard back that somebody from his office might have asked that in a subtle way, and they had no problem with me running on a 2/3 immigration reduction, which is great. I think Poilievre has actually always been hawkish on immigration. He's just been waiting for the moment where he got a good question out from a reporter where he could organically say, yeah, this is where I'm at on that. Because sometimes the worst way of announcing policies is just coming out to a podium and then saying, I have a new policy on X thing. Sometimes it's better that somebody throws a question at you and then you counterpunch, or you get a really good opening to talk about an issue. And that's what happened with that French reporter, a French reporter in Quebec, where they are very anti-immigration, had asked a question, and then it gave him a good moment in this casual setting to say, 1.2 million people a year is insane. Immigration will be much lower when I'm prime minister. Great setup. Just like when the media was hounding him about Daniel Smith being in favor of parental rights against gender theory, it actually gave him a great opening to take an even more principled stance than even Daniel Smith had, because he got to make a counterpunch on reporters who were not set up to respond to him saying, are you in favor of gender theory in the classroom? Do you think children should transition? That's where they all got on their heels, because they assumed that he was going to be weak and would run away from the question or condemn Danielle Smith. And when he came back at them, they all looked ridiculous, saying, "Oh, what is so you're saying you're against child transition?" He's like, "Yeah," and then they kept repeating the question because they couldn't believe that he was going to be so strident. But I hope Nigel Farage can win. The UK needs somebody who's going to reduce immigration. I'm not a single issue person on that, but that's a single issue, or that's one of many issues where when I look at candidates, they got to be strong against mass immigration, or I really can't back them. And people are like, "Oh, you're against immigration, or do you not like immigrants?" No, I like immigrants, and that's why I don't want 1.2 million of them entering the country, making it so every single new Canadian is completely impoverished by how overheated the housing market is and how overheated the job market is. The most abusive thing you can do to an immigrant is bring in 10 more to compete with them, because that's not fair to them who's just trying to get their feet under them. Have you having the hardest time converting the last three of my acquaintances to CPC? Wyatt, I've converted seven. Plus, please suggest something. Well, I'd say that your ratio is really good. You have a 70% success rate. I think that whenever you're convincing people who are on the fence, you got to almost be casual about it. Whenever I talk to voters, I'm never like, you can't vote Trudeau, he's corrupt, he's and blah, 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 he's a horrible person. I would just go like, yeah, they're incompetent. They're incompetent, so I'm voting conservative. I want my taxes lowered. Housing's ridiculous. I'm voting conservative, and keep it short and sweet. Honestly, people need to realize or learn how to talk to normal people. Jody, you sound like you're really good at it, considering that you're converting so many people. But I would say just keep it casual whenever you're talking to people. Never jump in and say, "Did you hear that Christy Verlin went to the World Economic Forum and she's in with the global?" It's like, stop it. Just say, Christy Freeland's incompetent. These people let 1.2 million people in the country. We only built 230,000 houses in a year. These people don't know what they're doing. I'm voting conservative. That's kind of the way I do it. Like, just be normal. Like, just be as if what you're saying, you could not be saying it at all. It's just something you're casually throwing out there. You're not having a discussion about politics. You're just shooting the breeze, and wow, it's like Trudeau's a moron, and then you kind of move on. When you get too manic about something, and I know I'm saying this is the most manic person you guys all know in your personal lives, but but when you get too strident about something and you get too engaged with something, people think this guy's obsessive and this is uncomfortable. You're trying to keep people comfortable. It doesn't mean you got to water down your policies like Aaron O'Toole did. You can have as stridently orthodox a position as you want as a conservative. You can be the Barry Goldwater of Canada, like I like to think of myself sometimes. Not that I'm on his level, but that's kind of a person where I align with a lot of his positions. Just talk to people. Just talk. And you're not having a political discussion. You're just talking. And that's how the best way of talking to people at the door is. Whenever I approach someone at the door, I just talk to them like they were a friend. It's crazy. There's 14 people running in this riding. A lot of them don't even live here. And you're just chatting. Some people talk to people like they're downloading information. If you're downloading information on someone, I wouldn't be shocked that they don't want to talk to you about this stuff. Stavros. When is the by-election in Toronto, St. Paul? The by-election is happening on Monday. And I find weekdays tend to be good for elections because people can go and vote before they go to work, after they go to work. I find on Saturdays, people are actually very unmotivated to get out the door. Although nomination votes tend to be on weekends because you can't justify to your employer, I'm going to go and vote in a nomination, because that's not federally protected voting, where they don't have to let you go and vote for that because it's not technically a real election, which says something that it's not a real election because that's the problem thing. Is all the parties run as private clubs, and I think one big reform that needs to be made in Canada is that we honestly need to get rid of memberships. It should just be that you can be a registered conservative, you can be a registered liberal, you can be a registered NDP if you want, and it's something that maybe the party can request information on when you were registered if they want to know that you didn't just switch 5 seconds ago to run for them. You can maybe be a registered independent, and you have the right to run and you have the right to vote in nominations. Because right now, when it's becoming too much of a members club, it makes it so that the nominations, someone who pointed this out, and it's crazy, only 1% of people have memberships for parties, and only about 70% of those people who have memberships vote in nominations. So we have less than 1% of people choosing who the candidates are in our elections, and most of the ridings are safe seats. So and some of these ridings, they're just appointing guys. So when you actually look at our caucuses in each of the parties, there's a lot of people who didn't actually win a race effectively in order to become the MP in their area. So it'd be good if we reformed the system where you have a right to run, and so that and also so membership sales don't become the name of the game. It just becomes, can you convince people to like you? Because really that should be it. Not having to find people who are willing to pull out the credit card to buy a $15 membership, because that real legitimately is the hardest part. I had a big list of households who were thinking about it, but even then, you would still only get about 1/3 of them who would actually do it. I still had a lot of supporters because that would still was like 900, 1,000 voters, plus a lot of people who weren't even on my list who were voting for me. But it's really difficult to get somebody to want to buy a $15 membership, because I would say I'd walk up to doors, 150, a little bit less than a 50% chance on some days that somebody even opens the door. And then if somebody opens the door, maybe a third of a chance that they're interested in any real way. And then probably half a chance that they'll want to be on your list. And then a third of a chance that those people will sign up for membership. So it starts whittling down really hard on who's actually is willing to take part in the process. Like, if anything, in schools, I'd want there to be classes encouraging kids to buy memberships for any party, just a party. Get involved and see what and just know how the process works, so that you're not 50 years old and you've never voted in a nomination in your entire life. Uh, if I if I smoked then I do now, I'd voted CPC. Marijuana legalization wasn't the worst. The price points aren't too different. Taxation-based legal growth, criminalization doesn't help. I just think it didn't help the country in any way, and I think that making it a bigger thing that people like more, especially younger people, smoke pot is not great in the long run. Man, have you ever seen tobacco taxes? It's crazy. 167% or 143%. I never realized that before. Uh, you make us more optimistic, lol. Chances for Kanzak happening under pure Polyev. I don't know. I think Kanzak's kind of a done deal. I think it's going to happen if the conservatives get in. That sounds weird. I also don't care that much about Kanzak. Would you support a $100,000 MP pay cut? Base pay is $201,000 before October 2025. Base pay for Ontario MPP is $116,000, different frozen since 2000. No, honestly, I would see a cut of $20,000, $25,000. The problem for MPs is when you pay them nothing, you're actually incentivizing corruption, because when you could make more money doing part-time accounting work. You're going to have a lot more people saying, well, if you want a meeting with me, if you want me to push for this bill, I want, $1,000 in an envelope sent to my house. So you actually do need to pay people enough to crack down on corruption. It's also like when there's too many laws and regulations and they're too complicated, that actually also incentivizes corruption and bribery, because it makes it so that government moves so slowly. If you want to incentivize someone to actually do their job, you might have to give them, $500. Man, if the conservatives win this riding, I'm a geek out and how I don't know what that means. As I was saying, I'm a geek out how the conservatives win this riding and how it would benefit the liberals and Canadians. I don't know. I know that's what you're saying. Your impression is. I'm just not sure if that would happen. Yeah, this is something that Canadians need to know more widely. In 2023, thank you for posting this, Aaron Taylor. In 2023, over $769 million spent on housing and feeding refugee applicants. That's from Blacklock reporter, which, if Blacklock is saying it, it's effectively true, because that's an entire publication where they mostly just do FOIP requests to get government numbers directly from their sources. And over 100 million spent in Niagara alone. Yeah, it's nuts how much is spent on rehousing people who are supposedly supposed to be helping. Who they can't be settled here, because if you need that much money to be settled here, you obviously don't have the capacity to really afford to live here in the long run. Wyatt, what's the polling in St. Paul? Don Stewart, a good candidate for the Tories. I mentioned this earlier. I actually don't think Don Stewart is that great of a candidate for the Tories. Like, again, if you live in the riding, vote Conservative, but he's a lobbyist and he works for Jenny, and he used to be the director at Jenny Byrne and Associates. So he's like a lobbyist tied to Poilievre's top advisor, which feels like a little bit of non-familial nepotism when a guy who's like a lobbyist and consultant is being run as the Conservative candidate. And I find lobbyists and consultants don't usually make the best candidates. That's just my feeling. That's effectively why we lost the 2019 election, is because way too many lobbyists and way too many consultants had their say over how the Conservative Party was running that campaign. And consultants, their main goal in any election campaign is risk management. And they risk manage their candidates and campaigns to death, because by risk managing yourself, you basically risk manage yourself from being interesting. That's the problem with risk management. And whenever people say, well, don't say that because you're going to, put our chances of winning at risk. No, I'm putting your chances of being interesting at risk and trying to make it so that people might actually talk about us. Not in the sense that you want people who are just screaming about nonsense and they're way too combative, fighting all the time, saying rude and vulgar things. That's not what I'm talking about. But someone says, yeah, I'd like a federal parental bill of rights. That's technically a controversial idea. You're also probably going to win way more people than you would lose by taking that stance. It's like if the Conservatives came out explicitly, and I think they need to, because they've been a little bit quiet on this. They criticize the Liberals, but they're not saying they'll reverse the policy. They need to come out and say that we will return the capital gains inclusion rate to 50% for any income over $250,000. Only 8% of conservatives, I think I even have the statistics right here so you guys can peruse them. So here we go. Only about 8% of conservatives think that the capital gains inclusion increase was a good idea. 25% of liberals think it was a bad idea. That is 19% of NDP think it was a bad idea, and 31% of Bloc voters think it was a bad idea. So obviously, the Conservatives have way more to gain on this issue than they have to lose. And even, I guarantee, many of the people who voted in favor of the capital gains inclusion rate are, frankly, just to stereotype it a bit, probably working class guys who are like, well, I don't care about if bankers lose some money, and that's who's voting in favor of it. But they're not going to stop voting Conservative if the Conservatives are in favor of reducing the capital gains inclusion rate again. Did that trigger the scoff from Jagmeet upon questioning? I don't know. Wait, what are you talking about? Hey, just wondering, considering it's been official NDP agenda to disband the military for decades now, since Jack Layton leads the leader talking about it, did that mark each and every member hostile? That'd be funny if that would be considered some level of foreign interference, that somebody must have gotten to the NDP and compromised the party into voting for like they're all compromised foreign actors trying to disband Canada's defenses. Who do you think is going to win? Honestly, I still think the Liberals have the edge in Toronto, St. Paul. Almont Gaming, what do you think of MPP Oosterhoff and Ford's caucus? I don't know. I don't really know. I know Oosterhoff is supposed to be like a hardcore orthodox pro-life conservative, but my problem is whenever I see people in Ford's government being led into cabinet, I almost feel like that's almost a sign that the person's too compliant to get anything done, because Ford's government is very liberal. That's why Jamil Javani, when I'll give him tons of credit, the guy who took over for O'Toole in the federal riding of Durham, he's been slamming Stephen Lecce and Doug Ford for being fake conservatives. And they effectively are. They literally endorsed Trudeau in the 2011 election. And so when Oosterhoff gets added to caucus or cabinet in some secretary or assistant ministerial role, I hope he'll be doing good things. But at the same time, he would have been one of the people who said nothing when, like, Belinda Karahalios was kicked out of caucus for opposing the blanket ability for Ford to call lockdowns whenever he wanted during COVID. Dan Demand, is Don Stewart a good candidate? Does he have potential in your opinion? Like, again, I haven't been studying Don Stewart closely other than I know he has a lobbyist background. When I look at him, I don't feel like it's the strongest candidate, because if I have to look into you as a candidate and dig into who you are, it's probably because you don't really give off that good of an impression right away. It's not because I'm going after him, he's a bad guy. hopefully he's more charismatic than he appears. But we need people who are fighters, I find, to win ridings like this, not simply people who are inoffensive and we hope that they'll jump over to our area. I don't see how the Liberals lose the riding of St. Paul's, considering Christine Firth likely was procuring malware spyware from the dark web, which means I don't really know. I don't know what you're talking about there, honestly. Uh, Tony Clark, I got a membership and voted for Pierre and voted for my conservative candidate in my area. Good. Yes. Make sure you get involved in nominations. And people have been saying to me, like, well, you got kicked out of your nomination, so now you're against the Conservative Party. Like, no, I'm not joining the flipping PPC. The PPC is, one, useless, and two, they also kick people out of nominations. Also, insiders being scummy is not then my right to then say everyone in the Conservative Party is corrupt and disgusting. That's an overstatement by a massive margin. 95% of the people in the party are fully straight up individuals. And so I'm not going to say, well, this person got rid of me, ergo Poilievre's a bad man. That would be foolish. And so, but there are some people with a truly Soviet attitude when it went inside the Conservative Party. Again, not many of them, the vast minority. But I got kicked out, and there was people being like, well, it's probably because Wyatt's a liberal, and they found out, what? I was the most conservative candidate in the race. I had people saying, well, the Conservative Party wouldn't kick you out for no reason, so you probably did something wrong, and you're just not telling us. That's like the equivalent of saying, well, Stalin wouldn't have had the man executed if he wasn't a traitor. But that's all I'm going to say on that. But you have so many people who start trying to gaslight you after you were treated unfairly. I spent more than 1,200 hours of my life campaigning for this in more than a year and a half. You know, for the first half of it, for the first half a year, it was a little bit more kicking tires. But my first day door knocking was December of 2022, before our MP had even announced he wasn't going to run again. I was invested in to come in at the 11th hour and say, nah, you're not going to allow to run, even though I was very competitive. And I was competitive. That's why they probably pushed me out. If I was only expected to get, 150 votes, 200 votes in a riding where there's 4,900 members, they wouldn't have cared. Funny thing is 200 votes is actually probably enough to win some of the Eastern nominations, even in these ridings that are safe flip seats. But yeah, it just shows you how ridiculously new many parts of Eastern Canada are into voting liberal, into voting conservative. But I ran in probably the toughest riding to win a nomination because it's super conservative, super competitive. I was competitive, and that's effectively why I got kicked out, because somebody else is gonna. And again, when I say I'm not compliant or somebody else was compliant and it seemed like certain people in the background of the party wanted them, it's not because I was campaigning on rocking the boat and I'm going to start fights in caucus and, swing at the lead. Obviously not. But it's I would be the type of person, I guess, who would be if I noticed a lobbyist screwing around in the background of the party, I'd be like, hey, what's up with that? Or that I'd be the type of person where I'm like, hey, we're supposed to fulfill this promise. Even then, even the compliance angle, I don't even think is real. I think it's that certain people want to help someone win a nomination so they can have an easy seat, so that person owes them forever. I think that's kind of what's going on there. Yeah, that's actually a good point. Campsite Zed, capital gains is stealth real estate tax, and yeah, it's a way of basically taking properties people inherit and sell and grabbing up a crazy amount of that money, because it's not hard to sell a house for more than $250,000 that you've inherited. Laura Luby, I agree with you. Andrew Scheer was overmanaged in 2019. He was not himself. His handlers lost that election. Yeah, Andrew Scheer is a really nice guy. And you can even tell when he did there's so many dual named people. When after he was out as leader and he did that interview right afterwards with Andrew Lawton, he was way more upbeat, way more positive. He was funnier. He was more like stalwart in the way he talked about policy. I wish we had that Andrew Scheer running for the party, but there's too many people jabbing at him, nattering in his ear, and so he just wasn't a normal person during the election because he was just overmanaged, had too many people telling him what to do. Yeah, I've gone over this a few times, Mitch, but basically I could win and somebody else in the party wants to advantage another candidate. We're still pushing for Michael Kim to win, and then so basically telling people to mark Michael Kim number 1 and Kelly Hopper number 2, and then David McKenzie number 3 to keep Jeremy Nixon out. Like the UCP is putting pressure to push Jeremy Nixon through. Like I heard like every MLA in the Calgary area who wasn't busy was basically told to come out and start phone calling for Nixon, who again doesn't live in the riding. It's just so pathetic that you have people who didn't do anything. Like Jeremy Nixon did not have a good record in office, and yet we're just going to let him have another riding in an area of the city he doesn't live in. That's what turns people off of politics and makes them walk away. Like I'm not going to walk away from politics because when you walk away, you let people who are less scrupulous win, and that's not really what I'm into. Anyways, actually, this is probably a good time to announce this because obviously I have a campaign website, and so like I'm not going to just shut down the website and saying, oh well, there's nothing, like I can't win this like the nomination or whatever, and shut down everything, burn everything I have. So I'm turning my website kind of into what Charlie Kirk does in the US with charliekirk.com. I'm using wyattclaypool.com now to organize. So if you guys watching, I just have a link in chat now for wyattclaypool.com. You guys can sign up on the list, put in your email, phone number, address, because I want to keep a list of where people live, so that in any nomination race that pops up around the country, I can recommend good people. I can recommend good municipal politicians. People can email me, ask me my opinion on a race. And if I feel comfortable enough making a recommendation on who I think is good, I can basically find everyone in that postal code area and then send you something where it's kind of like a personal newsletter for each individual area. Maybe I never email you because there's never an interesting race in your area. It's just the same guy serving for like 30 years straight. Who knows? But if anything does happen, I can target that area, or I can make like national recommendations. Or if you're in British Columbia, I can like send people links on, hey, here's where you can go and get involved with the BC Conservative Party. So that's kind of what I'm looking to turn that into. Yeah. Jody Mitchell, it's not in vain, Wyatt. Yeah, well, you gotta wake up every day and pound the ball downfield a little bit more. And even if people mess with you, you have to yeah. Mr. Awesome, is this who said McKenzie wasn't? I don't think you know who which McKenzie. I'm talking about David McKenzie, who's running in my area. And Jeremy McKenzie is not manly. He's kind of he's a whiny, sensitive man. It doesn't matter if you're a veteran. You can be a whiny, sensitive man as a veteran. And he is. He is extremely thin-skinned and a whack job. Delta Mail, too many forces trying to penetrate the cabinets. No room for you, Wyatt. And again, I don't think it's actually that. I don't think it's like a, conspiracy involving more than 3 people. I think it's just like a few people basically saying, we like that guy, not that guy. Well, Steve Stavros, I've talked about it a little bit, but Don Stewart, like conservative candidate in the riding of Toronto St. Paul, the only thing that I saw about him that, one, I just didn't see that much about him where I thought he was a super charismatic guy or anything like that. I'm not trying to like cram down on him. This is just me as a commentator, what I think, because I'm not going to go around the streets of Toronto St. Paul saying, I don't think he's super charismatic. I'm not trying to hurt the guy. But when I saw that some of his experiences being a director at the Jenny Burns and Associates lobbying firm, that made me think, did Jenny Byrne potentially put this guy in Toronto St. Paul as her friend to be made as the candidate? Because if he underperforms, to a certain extent, it might be on Jenny Byrne, who is the top advisor to Pierre Poilievre, in helping maybe have propped up her friend in this riding. Maybe he won a legitimate nomination. I don't know. Like a perfectly legitimate nomination. Maybe nobody wanted it, and that's how he was made the candidate. But if he loses, I think it is a testament to, consultants and lobbyists don't make for good candidates. Their entire jobs is to be inoffensive because their jobs are to represent other people's interests to people in government or to businesses. And so that person, when they have to take hard partisan stances, they tend to flip, they tend to go soft because they're not used to that. And it's just something that you can't do something for decades or even just a few years of just being a generic representative of certain interest group interests to government and then become the super partisan guy, because if you lose, well, you're going to have to jump back to being the nonpartisan guy. I'm not sure if I actually brought this up, but David Edwards, $2 super chat. Thank you for that, David. Oilers. Yes, I believe the Oilers are still winning. So, wow. Okay. Whoa. The game's already over and they won 5-1. Okay. Well, we have a much more interesting Stanley Cup final than we assumed we would have a few days ago. $2 super chat from David Edwards again. Thank you. Today's Scheer would have beat Trudeau. I believe so. Even if it was today's Scheer would have beat Trudeau. Now, I think even the 2019 overmanaged version of Scheer would have won today, because 2019, a lot of people hated Trudeau. I would say double the amount of people hate him in 2024. Aaron O'Toole was frankly the only man who could have lost the 21 election. Try again. You usually don't win the first go. The only problem is I could have won, and that's the annoying thing, is when someone basically cut the brakes from under you and didn't let you win. Because what I've heard from the other campaigns, they're like, we have this many members, and I think that we can get this done. Like my lists had, like, from what I had, we had like 320 households, and that's only what I had on lists, because we had other people who were supporting us who didn't want to be on the list, because some people get tired of being on too many lists. And then other people who watch the channel saying, I have a membership, don't worry, I'm going to vote for you. We had probably like around 1,000 supporters in a riding where there's only 4,900 memberships and there should have been 6 or 7 candidates. 1,000, basically a quarter of those who would actually probably turn out and vote, was like very competitive. So that's the annoying thing. At least if you get kicked out, it's not because you couldn't win. Verinder Sindhu, I want Trudeau to stay until next election just so he can get his butt handed to him by Polyev. You know what? Me too, Verinder. I think it's more cathartic if Polyev gets to smash Trudeau rather than Polyev having to beat like Mark Carney or some random other flunky. Chances of Doug Ford calling an early election in Ontario. Would PPC win a bigger majority? What you mean, CPC? Or no, Provincial Progressive Conservatives is assume what you mean. You clarified it there. I think, again, it could call an early election. The fact the NDP thinks he's serious and they're getting campaign managers hired means it could happen. If anything, I think he'd get punished and he'd lose seats from calling an early election. Like, I back the New Blue Party in Ontario because the PC party is just not very conservative in any way. And at some point you have to have a line you draw where you're saying, I'm no longer going to vote for this party if they don't get their act together. Ontario's PC party is not getting their act together. And so I'd go and vote for the New Blue Party of Ontario, who actually just had their policy convention. They're a very well-run small party where they actually have EDAs in every riding. They do policy conventions. They have nominations in every single riding where they have more than one person interested in running. They do the nominations fairly. So if you're looking for an ideal small party to join and help grow, go and join the New Blue Party of Ontario. But I'll drop my link to my organizing website again in the comments. You guys can go sign up to it. I'll make sure people know about local races and good candidates in their areas whenever I find them. I'm never going to pass someone else the list and let them have it. What the most I'll ever do is basically recommend someone, and you can go sign up for their personal list if you want. But obviously, if you're not willing to, if I recommend, hey, this person in this area is really good, and you don't want to go and sign up for their list, it wouldn't have been worthwhile for me to give them the list anyways, because you didn't want to be on their list, so why would you ever vote for them? So Wyatt, when is the candidate election for Signal Hill? It's in fact tomorrow, and the voting is taking place between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. I'm probably going to do some vote getting for some people on the phones. Riley Elder, do Reform win more seats than the Conservatives in the UK election? I believe so, even though the projections right now are showing them lower. I think that Reform could be in the high 20s, if not low 30s, by the time election day rolls around. I'm not sure if there's early voting in the UK. I hope there isn't. Simply, one, I think early voting is a little bit silly because it means that people aren't consuming all of the information from the election before voting. But also it means that if Reform starts gaining momentum, hopefully people haven't voted before the momentum has fully paid off. But I think Nigel Farage deserves to at least have a really good second place showing after Labour. If not, I hope Labour's vote starts collapsing. If Labour has a big scandal, then reform has a chance here. And knowing UK politics, their big parties do love scandals, so I hope that ends up hurting them. Reform Labour would be an absolute disaster for the UK. But anyways, this should be it for me today, guys. I think that I'm kind of out of stuff to talk about here. I don't really want to, keep rambling after more than an hour and 25 minutes. Maybe I'll answer this one last thing, or it's more of a comment. Nope, it's called karma. Polyev can only treat people like crap, lie and call names for so long before it bites them in the butt. What goes around comes around. Well, I don't think Polyev has been doing those things, but it's people in the background of the party who, when they're treating people like crap, they can't be shocked that if it starts hurting them in these ridings where they were picking the safe candidate, but they ticked off the membership and they said, well, we're not going to donate anymore. We're not going to help on the campaigns. Because the problem is that in messing with nominations, you're ticking off the people who show up and volunteer for you. And when they're like, why would I volunteer for the guy who was forced into my riding? That's when you're vulnerable, even in ridings where the projections are showing that you can win. In my area, it's impossible for the Conservatives to lose, but still, it's a big donor riding. If donors get mad, they might stop donating. And even though the Conservatives have good donations around the country, in maybe 3 to 4 years where donations aren't sprouting up everywhere because the Conservatives are in government and there's less of this momentum for people who usually don't donate to donate, then they're going to have to be coming back to ridings like Signal Hill and relying on them as big donation banks. And if people are still ticked off, we could have a problem here. Yeah, Bobby Ann Brady is actually a good reference that the PC party had messed with her and her nomination, and she came back and won as an independent. She is a rare person who can do that. Everyone knew her the riding. She was the secretary to the previous guy for like 20 years, was the person who'd show up to your house to do anything that the MPP didn't have time for. She was very good, and then she had a lot of money to run as an independent, and she ran in the nomination, so a lot of people already knew her. So that's a rare person who can win as an independent, but it proves that even when you're the favored party to win the provincial election, people will vote independent sometimes just to spite you. But anyways, that should be. I tried to sign up on your website, but it says CAPTCHA failed, even though there's no CAPTCHA to do. I will check into that, make sure that there isn't some phantom one. You might just have to re-sign up or do something like that. So I'll figure that out in a bit. So maybe you just have to reload the page, or maybe you have like an ad blocker on that's doing that. Because I'm looking at it now, and I even filled out the form myself to make sure it worked, and it didn't ask for me. So maybe just make sure that there's nothing screwing with you on your end. But yeah, I'll just drop that link one more time down there. And then the link to my Give, Send, Go, if you guys want to donate to the legal fund, just keeps us solvent with all the people trying to throw stupid lawsuits at us. But yeah, so that helps us out wherever you guys can contribute, and signing up to the website also helps. Does having a media company in any way conflict with you being in politics? I don't think it does. I think it's a big asset. It just means I talk to people and I actually discuss politics on a day-to-day basis. The funny thing is the safe candidates are oftentimes the people who have never convinced somebody to be conservative, because they never communicate publicly about politics. They just stay quiet so that they seem like a safe choice for a lobbyist insider to jam into a nomination. But anyways, okay, well, that should be it for me today, guys. I'll see you around for another live stream. Obviously, more pre-recorded videos every day. I try to at least do one video a day and check in with you guys at least once every 1 to 2 weeks on the live stream. So see you guys around, and thank you for supporting the show.